To commemorate the 100th anniversary of Woodrow Wilson's inauguration, the Wilson Center, the nation's living memorial to its 28th president, conducted a day-long program that explored his legacy through the prism of critical issues facing the nation and the world.
It is a fitting honor to be here and to use this space to celebrate the 100th anniversary of President Wilson's first inauguration in Washington.
President Wilson, of course, is much less known for his sense of humor than more for his global vision. And that vision rested on three pillars. It rested on his recognition of American power, his embrace of American global leadership, and finally, his very real commitment to the American idea of self-determination.
At the U.S. Department of State, Director of Policy Planning David McKean began with remarks on Wilson's global vision and ended by extending well wishes from Secretary of State John Kerry and introducing a video greeting from President Barack Obama.
In March 1913, Woodrow Wilson took the oath of office with his hand on a Bible open to Psalm 119, which reads in part, "So shall I keep thy law continually forever and ever." Then, in his inaugural address, he explained to the American people his vision of the laws he had sworn to uphold. The purpose of government, he said, is to keep sound the society it serves, to preserve the good, reform the bad, and protect the vulnerable so that all might gain from the government they elect.
The program continued with a discussion between Pulitzer Prize-winning author Scott Berg and political commentator Chris Matthews.
You mentioned one of the reasons to read biography is to find this human side of the great figures in our lives. The other really great reason, I think, to read biography, or at least what I attempt to do when I write biography, and it's something I hope we will consider throughout the day as we hear some wonderful scholars talk about the specifics of Wilson's career, is really to set the context of the times.
At the Wilson Center, Princeton University professor Anne-Marie Slaughter moderated a panel examining President Wilson's landmark foreign policy agenda.
I think that's an important point. He really thought he was, after all, a domestic political scientist originally, right? He's a domestic political scientist, and he thinks what happens domestically cannot be separated from what happens in the world, that politics do not end at the water's edge, that a representative democracy will behave differently than a government who need not answer to its people.
And Woodrow Wilson says, that's not enough. We can't just sit back passively and be the city on the hill. That's good. We ought to be the example to the world. But we need to proselytize. We need to push democracy. And that's what he did.
When Wilson became president-elect, the issue of the central banking issue had ripened to a point where something was ready to go. And what had done that was early in 2012, the so-called Pujo hearings occurred, which was a raking over of the banking system and the money trusts and Wall Street in terminology which you would find embarrassing today as being extreme.
Switching the focus to domestic policy, Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, provided an overview of Wilson's transformation of the U.S. financial system, changes that still reverberate today. The panel that followed also discussed Wilson's often controversial record on women's rights and race. The Centennial celebration concluded with a reception at the U.S. Capitol building in the majestic setting of Statuary Hall.
The Center is a global brain trust, a worldwide network of scholars, policymakers, business and civic leaders that generates actionable ideas and prepares the next generation of global leaders for policy challenges ahead. Woodrow Wilson would approve of us. He admonished that we are not put into this world to sit still and know, we are put on it to act.
Wilson, I think, would see the development of democratic institutions over the past century as one of the most positive historical developments since his day. And I think he would see it as one of the most closely tied.
You know, tonight we're not just celebrating Woodrow Wilson as president, we're honoring him as a student of the Congress as well.
100 years ago, Wilson took the oath of office, and while Jane was speaking earlier about how long he responded, it takes longer to write a shorter speech, I was recalling that in my teenage years, as I was reading J.D. Salinger in one of his books, he says at the end, if I had more time, I would have written you a shorter letter. So in keeping with that, I also remember, though that was in English class, in history class, at the time we were learning about Woodrow Wilson, and that Halloween, you only reminded me of, in your speeches of this, it came to me that in my teenage years I once went to a Halloween party dressed as Wilson's 14 Points, but nobody, it was a white sheet and it had hangers and they all pointed out and nobody could guess what I was, and I thought it was so obvious. Anyway, I'm going to try it again.
Woodrow Wilson's legacy is at the center of our beliefs as a mature nation that all of the peoples of the world deserve to breathe free, to fulfill their destinies, and to live in peace.
Wilson believed in cooperation in government. And I want to rephrase that actually. He believed more literally in the cooperation of government. He believed that legislation was passed because the two branches, the executive and the legislative, were cooperating, they were working together.
Congratulations on all of your accomplishments. Congratulations to Woodrow Wilson and all that he gave us over the last 100 years.
Today, his legacy lives on in the work of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, our nation's living memorial to our 28th president.
As we commemorate the 100th anniversary of the inauguration of Woodrow Wilson as president, let us rededicate ourselves to these principles and to Woodrow Wilson's hope, as expressed in that first inaugural address, to have the pure heart to comprehend and the rectified will to choose our high course of action.
Now, in the quarter century since I left the center, the distinguished chairman, Gildenhorn, board members and directors of the center have all added a permanent and more capacious home for this unique memorial, have filled it with a great variety of skilled and dedicated staff, fellows, and public programs of a kind that Jane Harmon only modestly described at the beginning of this gathering, and I'm sure has been evident to everyone in this room.
And again, thank you, Woodrow, for 100 years of an international policy that, at its best, honors our country and honors our world.